There is an outage on my screen right now, as I speak to you, that is happening in a neighborhood that has not existed since 1989. 11 houses losing power. I can see the customer count. I can see the clock. The houses were torn out of the ground 36 years ago. The wires were cut and hauled away. The streets are dirt and tree roots now. And 11 of them just went dark. I am not supposed to do anything about it. That is the rule. I am supposed to let it run, let the clock finish, and let the book close itself, the way 19 years of people in this chair have let it close before me. Because the outage is not the thing going wrong. The outage is the thing working. The dark out there is a cage, and the length of the dark is what keeps the cage shut. The problem is that the durations are getting longer. They have been getting longer for 36 years. And I have done the math on where the line is heading, and there is a night coming, not many years out, when the dark will last longer than the gap between, when one outage will not finish before the next one starts, when the book will open and not be allowed to close. I do not know what is out there waiting for that night. I only know that it has learned my name, that the outages now start during my shifts and only my shifts, and that there is a note in the archive, in my own handwriting, that I do not remember writing. So let me tell you how a man whose entire job is closing records ended up sitting in a chair he cannot leave, watching a book that will not close, in front of 11 dark houses that are not there. The full script. There is an outage on my screen right now, as I speak to you, that is happening in a neighborhood that has not existed since 1989. 11 houses, losing power. I can see the customer count. I can see the clock. The houses were torn out of the ground 36 years ago. The wires were cut and hauled away. The streets are dirt and tree roots now, and 11 of them just went dark. I am not supposed to do anything about it. That is the rule. I am supposed to let it run, let the clock finish, and let the book close itself, the way 19 years of people in this chair have let it close before me. Because the outage is not the thing going wrong. The outage is the thing working. The dark out there is a cage, and the length of the dark is what keeps the cage shut. The problem is that the durations are getting longer. They have been getting longer for 36 years. And I have done the math on where the line is heading. And there is a night coming, not many years out, when the dark will last longer than the gap between. When one outage will not finish before the next one starts. When the book will open and not be allowed to close. I do not know what is out there waiting for that night. I only know that it has learned my name, that the outages now start during my shifts and only my shifts, and that there is a note in the archive, in my own handwriting, that I do not remember writing. So let me tell you how a man whose entire job is closing records ended up sitting in a chair he cannot leave, watching a book that will not close, in front of 11 dark houses that are not there. I have been an outage analyst for the regional grid operator for 19 years. My job is to look at why the lights go out and to make sure they come back on. It is not exciting work. Most of what I do is read numbers that other machines have already read and confirm that the story those numbers tell is the story that actually happened. I am good at it because I do not like loose ends. I want the record to close. That is why I want to tell this the right way, in order, without skipping the parts that made me doubt myself. Because the thing I cannot close is an outage that the system logged in a place that has not existed since 1989, and the longer I stayed near it, the more it stopped being a record of something that happened and started being an instruction about something that was going to. Let me start with what is normal, so you understand how far off the normal we eventually got. I work out of a control office attached to a transmission substation on the northern edge of the service territory, in a part of the county that used to be busy and now mostly is not. The substation itself is old, energized continuously since the early 60s, upgraded in pieces over the decades the way these places always are, so that nothing in it is the same age as anything else. The yard outside is steel and porcelain, and the constant low hum you stop hearing after your first week. The office is a single-story brick building that smells like warm electronics and the particular dust that settles on equipment that is never turned off. There are usually 3 of us across the day, and at night, there is 1. The night seat is mostly monitoring. You watch the feeds, you acknowledge alarms, you log anything that crosses a threshold, and you call the line crews if something needs a truck. Most nights, nothing needs a truck. You drink coffee that has been on the burner too long, and you watch a wall of screens tell you that electricity is behaving the way electricity is supposed to behave. The way an outage gets recorded is worth understanding because the whole thing turns on it. When power is interrupted somewhere downstream of us, the affected meters and the protective relays and the automated field devices all report it, and the management system stitches those reports into a single event. The event gets a location, drawn from the asset database, which knows every transformer and every span of line and every service point by a permanent identifier. It gets a start time, an affected customer count, a cause code once we figure the cause out, and a restoration time. That record is the truth of the outage. If the record says a feeder dropped at 2:14 and restored at 2:51, affecting 406 customers, then that is what happened, and that is what the regulators see, and that is what we are measured against. The asset database is the spine of all of it. Nothing can have an outage if it does not exist in the asset database, because the system needs to know what the location is in order to attach the event to it. We retire equipment all the time. When a line is taken out of service permanently, when a neighborhood is torn down, when a service point goes away, the assets get a retirement date and a status flag, and they drop out of the live model. They stay in the historical tables forever because we never actually delete anything, but they cannot generate new events. A retired asset is a closed book. It can be read. It cannot be written to. I'm telling you all of this because the first thing that happened was an outage record attached to an asset that had been retired 36 years ago. It came in on a Tuesday, in the dead middle of a night shift, on no particular night. I was doing the thing where you let the screens blur, and your eyes catch only movement, and the outage panel updated. A single event, small, 11 customers. Cause code blank, which is normal at the moment of inception. Start time current. Location field populated with an asset identifier I did not recognize, which is also not unusual, because there are tens of thousands of them, and I have memorized maybe a few hundred. What was unusual was that when I clicked through to pull the asset details, so I could tell the line crew where to roll a truck, the database returned a record with a retirement date of October 1989 and a status of demolished. 11 customers had just lost power on a piece of distribution line that had been physically removed from the world before some of my co-workers were born. I want to be honest about my first reaction, because it was not fear. It was irritation. My first thought was that someone had fat-fingered an asset ID during a recent field update, and that the system had matched the typo to a real historical record. And now I had a phantom event that I would have to chase down and void so it did not pollute our reliability numbers. That happens. Data is entered by humans, and humans are tired at 3 in the morning, and the system is too literal to know when a number is nonsense. So I did the boring, correct thing. I went to void the event, and the system would not let me void it, because to void an event you have to attach a cause code, and the only cause codes that let you void an outage are the ones that mean it never really happened, like a metering error or a false relay trip. But the event was still live. The 11 affected service points were still reporting as de-energized in real time. You cannot mark something a phantom while it is actively happening. The system, in its rigid way, was insisting that whatever this was, it was real enough to be losing power right now. I pulled up the historical map layer for that retired asset, the one that shows what the network looked like before a section was taken out. And there it was. A small loop of residential distribution, serving a subdivision on the far northern edge of the territory, past where the new development stops, in an area that on the current map is just a county road and a stand of trees and a drainage easement. The subdivision had a name in the historical record. I will not give you the real name, because I do not want anyone driving out there. Call it the way the old plat called it, a neighborhood, with streets and lot numbers, and 11 of those lots flagged in this moment as customers without power. The historical notes attached to the retirement were sparse and bureaucratic. Subdivision acquired, structures removed, distribution de-energized and dismantled. October 1989. There was a reference to a county action. There was the kind of dry language that tells you a whole neighborhood of people picked up and left and a contractor came through with equipment afterward, and that the only thing anyone wrote down was the part about the wires. I sat with that. 11 customers, on streets that were dirt and tree roots now, losing power that had not run to them in 36 years. I did what I think most people in my seat would do. I decided the field devices were lying. The most likely explanation, the boring one, was that a piece of automated equipment somewhere in the network was misreporting, that its address had somehow gotten cross-wired to retired assets in the model, and that the 11 dead customers were a software ghost. I made a note in the shift log, flagged the event for the day shift data team to investigate, and I tried to move on. But I kept the panel open. And 40 minutes after it started, the event restored. On its own. Restoration time logged, duration 38 minutes, 11 customers back. Cause code still blank. The book closed itself. In 19 years, I had never seen an outage on a retired asset. I had certainly never seen one restore. I told myself it was a glitch that had begun and ended, and that the day team would find the misconfigured device, and we would all laugh about the haunted neighborhood. And I went home and I slept badly, which I told myself was the coffee. The day team did not find a misconfigured device. They found nothing. The asset was retired, the model was clean, there was no field equipment addressed to that location because there was no field equipment out there at all. The event sat in the database as an orphan. A real time-stamped outage with a real duration attached to a thing that could not have one. They could not void it for the same reason I couldn't. They eventually did what offices do with things that do not fit. They wrote a note that the event was under investigation, and they let it sit. And the investigation, the way these investigations go, quietly stopped being anyone's job. I would probably have let it stop being my job too, except that 9 days later, it happened again. Same neighborhood, different lots this time, 9 of them instead of 11, and a couple that overlapped with the first event. Start time in the middle of my shift again, which I noticed and did not like. Duration this time was 51 minutes, restored on its own, cause code blank. 2 events made it a pattern, and a pattern is a different animal than a glitch. A glitch is random. A pattern has a shape, and a shape implies a cause. And the whole reason the boring explanation had been comforting was that it did not require a cause out there in the trees. I started keeping my own log, separate from the official one. I am not a superstitious man, and I want to be clear that I did not, at this point, believe anything was out there. I believed I had a data integrity problem with a personality, the way some bugs do, where they only show up under conditions you cannot quite pin down. So I logged conditions. Date, time, which lots, duration, weather, what equipment elsewhere in the network had been doing, whether I had been the one on shift. I was building the case I would hand to someone smarter so they could close it. The third event was when I noticed the thing about the durations. Event 1 was 38 minutes. Event 2 was 51. Event 3, which came 11 days after the second, was 67 minutes. I had written the numbers in a column without thinking about them as a sequence. And then one slow night I looked at the column and the durations were getting longer. Not randomly longer. The gaps between them were closing and the lengths were climbing. Something was running longer each time, and running more often. I did the thing you do, which is tell yourself a sequence of 3 is not a sequence. But I also did the other thing, the thing my whole career is built on, which is I pulled the history. This is the part where it stopped being a software problem. I went into the historical event tables, the archive where retired assets live, and I queried every outage that had ever been recorded against that neighborhood's assets all the way back. And the system returned a list that did not stop at the 1989 retirement date. There were events after demolition, not many. Scattered across the decades, years apart. Easy to miss because nobody queries retired assets. 1 in the early 90s, 2 in the early 2000s, 1 about a decade ago, and then a cluster in recent years that got denser as it approached the present, and then my 3. Every one of them had the same shape. Start time in the dark hours, self-restoring, cause code blank, and every one of them, I realized when I checked the durations, had been longer than the one before it, going all the way back. The 38 minutes I had logged as event 1 of my own was not event 1 of anything. It was a continuation of a count that had been climbing since before I was hired, since before some of the people who hired me were hired. The neighborhood that did not exist had been losing power, on a slow, accelerating schedule, for 36 years, and the durations had grown from the very first one after demolition, which had lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes in 1990, 67 minutes a few weeks ago, a line bending upward. I want to tell you I took this to my manager immediately. I did not, and the reason is the reason I think anyone in an old institution will understand. I had a column of numbers from a database that everyone agreed was haunted by a known bug, and I had a theory that the bug had a 36-year heartbeat. If I walked into my manager's office with that, I would not be the analyst who found something. I would be the analyst who needed a break. So I decided to do more work first. I decided to get something undeniable. I went looking for whoever had handled these events before me. The archive holds the shift logs too, scanned in from the old paper books for the years before everything went digital. I pulled the night shift logs for the dates of the historical phantom outages, and most of them said nothing, just the standard notation that an event had occurred and restored. But on a handful of them, in the margins, in different handwriting across different decades, there were notes that were not standard. The earliest one I found, next to the 4-minute event from 1990, said only, "North loop again, let it run, let it run." A later one from the 2000s in a different hand said, "Do not roll a truck. Do not call it in. It closes itself. Log and leave it." And one from about a decade ago, the densest and the most unsettling, written by someone whose handwriting got smaller as the note went on, like they were trying to fit a warning into a space too small for it. "North loop is on a clock. Don't shorten it. Whatever you do, don't try to restore it early. If you cut it short, it comes back sooner and longer. Let the duration finish. The duration is the only thing keeping it out there instead of here." I read that last one several times. The duration is the only thing keeping it out there instead of here. There was an unofficial rule. It had been passed down in the margins of a logbook by night shift workers who had never met each other across the better part of 4 decades. And the rule was this: when the dead neighborhood loses power, you do nothing. You do not send a crew. You do not investigate. You do not try to restore it. You let the outage run its full length, however long that has become, and you let it close itself. Because the outage was not a failure of the system. The outage was the system doing its job. Something was being kept out there, in the empty lots where the houses used to be, and the way it was kept out there was that for the duration of each event, the power to that place was off, and as long as the books stayed open for the full count, the thing the books were holding stayed where it was. And the durations were climbing because whatever was being held needed more and more time held in the dark to keep it held. I understand how that sounds. I understood it then, but understand also that I had 3 events of my own, and a 36-year curve of historical events, and a chain of handwritten warnings from people who had sat in my chair. And every one of those data points was consistent with the impossible explanation, and none of them were consistent with the boring one. At a certain point, refusing to believe the data is not skepticism. It is just a different kind of faith. So I followed the rule. The next event came, 8 days later, and it ran for 79 minutes, and I sat there and I did nothing, and I watched the book close itself, and I logged it the way the margins had taught me. Log and leave it. Let it run. And there was a horrible relief in it, because for the first time the thing had a procedure, and procedure is the thing I trust. I should have stopped there. I had the pattern. I had the rule. I had a way to live with it. But I am the kind of person who wants the record to close, and the record did not close. It only kept itself open on a timer. I wanted to know what the timer was holding, so I did the one thing every margin note had told me, in increasingly desperate handwriting, not to do. I did not try to restore an event early. I want to be clear about that, because that was the specific forbidden act, and I did not commit it. But I did something the rule did not explicitly forbid, which I have come to understand was worse, because the rule was written by people who never imagined someone would be foolish enough to do it. I drove out there, during an outage, while it was running. The next event started a little after 1 in the morning. By then, I knew the rhythm well enough that I had stopped being surprised by the start times always landing in my shifts, which is a detail I had decided not to think too hard about. The panel lit up, lots in the dead neighborhood reporting de-energized, and I looked at the projected duration based on the curve, which by now was creeping past 90 minutes, and I thought I had time. The substation is 20 minutes from the county road that runs past where the neighborhood used to be. I told the automated systems I was doing a field check on a different asset, which was a lie I will have to live with, and I took a truck and I drove out to look at the place that was losing power. The county road out there is bad and gets worse, and then it is just the road and the trees and a gated easement where a development never happened. I parked at the gate. My phone had service barely. I had the outage panel up on it, the 11 lots and the running clock, and I had a flashlight, and I had the specific stupid confidence of a man who has read every relevant document and believes that makes him safe. Here is what was out there. Nothing at first. The drainage easement, the trees, the broken remnants of a road grid that you would only recognize as a road grid if you had seen the old plat, which I had. Curbs with grass growing out of the seams. The flat rectangular clearings where foundations had been pulled, gone soft and overgrown but still legible if you knew to look. 11 of them, in the rough shape of a neighborhood. And it was dark out there, the way a place is dark when it has never had streetlights, which this place had once had, because I had stood at the base of a leaning, rusted, headless streetlight pole that the demolition crew had cut off and left. I walked the old grid with my flashlight while the clock on my phone ran. I want to describe the quiet, because the quiet was the first thing that was wrong. It was not the quiet of an empty field. There are always insects, wind, the small, constant noise of a living place. Out there, inside the boundary of the old subdivision, there was nothing. The flashlight beam moved, and the dark closed behind it, and there was no sound at all, except my own feet. And that absence had a quality of attention to it, the way a room goes quiet when everyone in it has stopped talking to listen to you. I walked to the center, to where the old plat showed a small common, and I stood among the soft rectangles of the vanished houses, and I watched the clock on my phone. And I felt, for the first time in my careful, documented investigation, genuinely afraid. Not of anything I could see, of the durations. Because standing there in the dark, I finally understood, in my body in a way the numbers had not managed, what the rule meant. The power being off was not the outage, the power being off was the cage. And I was standing inside the cage, during the only window of time it was occupied, looking for the thing it was built to hold. The flashlight died. I had checked the batteries before I left, the way I check everything, and they had been full, and the light went from a clean white beam to nothing in the space of a single step. And I was standing in the absolute dark, in the center of a neighborhood that the world had erased, inside a running outage, and the quiet that had been listening to me changed. It started to fill in. Not with sound exactly, with the memory of sound, the way you can stand in an empty house and feel the shape of the life that used to fill it. I stood in the dark, and the 11 soft rectangles around me were no longer empty foundations. There was the sense of houses. There was the sense of light behind windows that were not there, of the low hum of a neighborhood after midnight, refrigerators and porch lights and the electricity I had spent 19 years following, running again to lots that had no wires, and the certainty that if my flashlight had still worked, and I had turned to look, I would have seen them, lit, occupied, full, a neighborhood at 1 a.m. with its lights on, drawing power that the system was recording in real time on the phone in my hand. And underneath the memory of all that ordinary light, moving through it, between the houses that were and were not there, was the thing the durations were holding. I did not see it. I want to be honest because the whole point of this account is to be honest. I did not see it. But I felt the dark organize itself, the way the quiet had organized itself to listen, and I felt it become aware that the cage had a man standing in it. A man who was not held by the rule because the rule had never imagined him. And I felt the attention I had sensed at the edge of the clearing turn, and find me and begin, slowly, with the patience of something that had waited 36 years, and was very good at waiting, to come closer. I ran. I will not pretend it was anything more dignified than that. I ran in the dark across ground I could not see, toward where I thought the gate was, and the soft rectangles seemed to be in different places than they had been, and the broken curbs caught my feet. And the whole time the clock that I could not see anymore but knew was running was the only thing in my mind, because I understood that I needed the duration to finish, that I needed the book to close, that as long as the outage was running, the cage was open and I was inside it with the thing, and that when the duration completed and the power restored to houses that were not there, the cage would close again, whether or not I was still inside. I made the gate. I do not fully remember how. I got into the truck and the dome light came on, ordinary and electric and merciful, and I sat there with the doors locked, which is a foolish thing to do against something that does not need doors. And I watched the clock on my phone, and the outage ran, and the duration that night was the longest yet, well over 100 minutes. And I sat in the cab and watched the trees, and did not look at the rectangles of the old houses, and waited for the book to close. It closed at 3:11 in the morning, The panel updated, 11 customers restored. Cause code blank, duration logged. The quiet outside the truck became ordinary quiet again. Insects and wind, a living empty field. And I knew without being told that the cage had shut, and that whatever I had stood next to was held again, out there for now, for as long as the durations kept climbing and the books kept being allowed to run their full length. I drove back to the substation. I logged the night with a lie about a field check. And I sat in my chair until the day shift came, and I have not been right since. Here is what I have understood in the months since, and here is why I am telling you instead of taking it to anyone who could do something, because there is nothing to do. The system is working exactly as designed. The substation, the model, the asset database, the automated event recording, none of it is broken. It was built originally to do an ordinary thing, to track when the lights go out and bring them back. But it sits on top of a place where something was buried in 1989, along with the neighborhood, and the people who decommissioned that neighborhood, or someone among them, understood that the only thing that would keep what was buried was a controlled, recorded, fully completed interval of darkness, recurring, growing, attended. They could not write that down as policy. So they wrote it in the margins, and they passed it from one tired person in one quiet chair to the next, for 36 years. The way the only truly important rules in any institution are always passed, unofficially in the dark, by people who lower their voices. The durations are still climbing. I check. The events still always start during my shifts, which I have stopped being able to pretend is a coincidence, because I think that when I drove out there and stood in the cage, the thing did not just notice me. I think it learned me. I think the reason the start times find my shifts is that I am now part of the procedure. The way the chair I sit in is part of the procedure, and I do not know whether that means it is keeping me close because I am the current attendant, or because the curve is heading somewhere, and it is making sure I will be the one in the chair when it arrives. Because here is the thing about the curve that I have not been able to stop calculating. The durations are growing, and the gaps between events are shrinking, and if you extend the line, the way I extend lines for a living, the two of them meet. There is a point, not very many years out, where the next event will not have finished before the next one starts, where the duration will be longer than the gap, where the book will not be able to close before it has to open again. I do not know what happens out there in the dead neighborhood on the night the power goes off and does not come back on in time, the night the cage is open and stays open because the durations have finally grown longer than the dark can hold. I do not know whether the rule, let it run, let the duration finish, will even be possible anymore, because you cannot let a duration finish if the next one begins first. What I know is that the substation hums the way it has hummed since the 60s, and that out past the Bad County Road there are 11 soft rectangles in the grass that lose power on a tightening schedule, and that somewhere in a binder in the archive there is a margin note in my own handwriting now, added the week after I drove out there, that I do not fully remember writing, that says only, do not go out there during. It knows the attendant. Let it run, let it run, let it run. And tonight I am on shift, and the panel is open, and it is a little after midnight, and the 11 lots have just gone dark.